Hey students, today we're going to talk about conditional statements. We've talked a lot about inductive reasoning and we've talked a lot about deductive reasoning. A really important part of deductive reasoning that we haven't talked about yet is the conditional statement. So first, what is a conditional statement? Basically, it's just an if-then statement. So if blah 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 blah, then blah 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 blah. Right? The first blah 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 is the hypothesis. So let me change colors here. If hypothesis, then conclusion. What this basically means is if the hypothesis is true, then so is the conclusion. Right? And we've looked at statements like this already. You just didn't know that they were called conditional statements. If you will remember, before we treated these statements, before we would use Venn diagrams to look at these statements. So look at the first part of your video guide. Right? There are a few different Venn diagrams. The one example is about teenagers. So if you're 16 years old, then you're a teenager. The next one is if you're a sparrow, then you're a bird. Right? That's because if we have the group of all of the birds, a special type of group is the sparrows. Right? You cannot be a sparrow unless you're also a bird. So the next one, we'll do one more of these together. Let's do D. The big circle is Africa, and then there's a small circle on the inside that says Kenya. So take a second to just pause the video and then write down what you think the if-then statement would be. Alright, hopefully you got if Kenya, so like if you're in Kenya, or if the place is Kenya, then Africa. Because if you're going to be in Kenya, then you must also be in Africa. Right? So I want you to take care of the rest of those Venn diagrams yourselves. Alright. Let's draw a Venn diagram based on the if-then statement. If a student is in the 10th grade, then the student is in high school. So which group would be bigger? The group of 10th graders or the group of high schoolers? Hopefully you said the group of high schoolers. So this will be all of the high schoolers. And then a special type of high schooler, it's more specific, is the 10th graders. So that would be what the Venn diagram looks like for that. Go ahead and take care of the other Venn diagram yourself on the video guide. Alright. The if part, I already mentioned this, but the if part is the hypothesis. This is what has to be true in order to say that the then part, which is the conclusion, the hypothesis has to be true in order to say that the conclusion is true. Right? There's one more word on this first page. It's negation. So think for a second, what does the word negation sound like? What words are similar? Pause the video and try to write your own definition down for what you think negation is. Alright, hopefully you wrote down your own ideas. But a negation is basically just saying not blah 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 blah. So the negation is the opposite. The opposite. And there's a special symbol that we have to write the negation. So suppose we had, if I go to the gym. Right? And all of the hypothesis, so this is the hypothesis. If we just picked a variable for that, like happy face, what's my hypothesis? Hypothesis is happy face. The negation, we would use a little squiggly. This little squiggly means not. I think I'm making it worse. This little squiggly means not. So that would be like if I don't go to the gym. So that's what a negation is, right? We use hypotheses and conclusions, and we use their negations to make more statements, to make more like conditional statements. All right, so let's look on the next page. We're going to do one of these examples together. Let's do the middle one, right? All apes love bananas. Okay, this one's kind of tricky because there's no if or then. So we'd have to think, what's the conclusion in this? Would it be loving bananas or would it be apes? Hopefully you thought the conclusion would be loving bananas because it's kind of like what you're getting at. So we want to figure out what the hypothesis is. Usually the letter we use to abbreviate for hypothesis is P. I'm not really sure why it's P, but it's P, right? The hypothesis is going to be if ape, right? That's kind of lazy math shorthand, but if something is an ape, and then what would the conclusion, the abbreviation for conclusion is usually Q. All right, if you're an ape, then you love bananas. None of you are apes, but if you were apes, then you would love bananas. Okay, what would the negation of the hypothesis be? So not P. What would that be? Oops. That would be if you are not an ape. And then not Q would be then you don't love bananas. So all we're doing for the negations is just making it the opposite. Right? You love bananas. The opposite would be you don't love bananas. Not necessarily you hate bananas, you just don't love bananas. Okay, so we could write this in if-then form. If-then form would be if you are an ape, then you love bananas. It's taking a statement and then putting it into a conditional form. So there are two other statements that you have to do the same process for. Go ahead and take care of those on your own. And let's look at that last page. Alright, there's a table there that you'll want to fill out. Right? And the example for all of this is if I am a dog, then I am an animal. Do you guys think that's true or false? I know there's not a space for it, but at the top left of your paper, just to kind of show me that you watched this video and actually followed along, I want you to put a T or an F if you think that this conditional statement is true or false. So either a T or an F, and then I want you to put a heart around it. That's how I know that you watched this video. Alright? So, 3 more words and then we're done. There's inverse, converse, and the long one, contrapositive. So if our conditional statement was if I'm a dog, then I'm an animal, we could abbreviate that as if P, then Q. The inverse would be if not P, then not Q. Right. So you go ahead and write out the example for that. Pause the video real quick and write down the example for inverse, using our dog animal example. Alright, hopefully you got if I am not a dog, then I am not an animal. Again, do you think that's true or do you think that's false? Take note of if you think this is true or false. Right? The converse would be if Q, then P. So again, pause the video to write out what you think the example would be. Alright, hopefully you got if I am an animal, then I am a dog. Right? Again, is that true or false? The last one is contrapositive. This one is if, my goodness, this pen is acting all weird. If not Q, then not P. Right, so pause the video and say if you think this is true or false. Alright, hopefully you also wrote the example. Sorry, I didn't ask you to. But it would be, if I am not an animal, then I am not a dog. Is that true or is that false? Right. So don't forget to do the last 3 bullets on this video. They're really important. Alright, you guys, there's one more thing that I want you to do, again, just to show me that you watched this. I want you to write M-Town with like a squiggly underlining. I want you to write that in the bottom right of your paper. Alright, see you guys later.